There we go. You should see that. So we should be good to go.
Okay, welcome to this week's Data Platform Down Under user group with Martin and Warwick, the hosts. Today we've got two great presentations, and the reason I am presenting first is because Warwick is actually one of our speakers together with Ginger. So just before I get on to some details about them, the session will be recorded. It'll be put on our YouTube channel. So if you don't want to be on screen for the remainder of the session, please turn your camera off, and that'll be all good. If you want to remain on screen, though, entirely up to you. So who have we got today joining Warwick? We've got Ginger Grant from Arizona. And as it happens, both Warwick and Ginger will be presenting at the International FabCon in Las Vegas at the end of March. So what are they going to be doing? Ginger's got one presentation. Well, it's actually a workshop on building end-to-end lakehouse solutions, hands-on. Warwick has 3 sessions, one of which is a joint session with Ginger. So,
nice
yeah, really looking forward to that. And FabCon's a great place if you've never been. I went last year. The community zone there is pretty good. Meet lots of program group managers and the like. But enough from me. I will hand over to either Warwick or Ginger and get them to take it away. I'll be watching the chat. If there's any questions come up, I'll pass them through to the two presenters. Okay, take it away, guys.
Thanks, Martin. Let me just share this. Okay, everybody can see this opening slide deck?
Yep.
Excellent. All right. As Martin said, thank you, Martin. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Today's session brought to you by Desert Isle Group, as well as SQL Masters Consulting. Ginger and I will be talking to you about developing with Spark for Microsoft Fabric with Copilot. So with that, before we jump in, I'll let Ginger introduce herself so that you all know.
Thank you very much. And thank you also, Warwick, for putting up the discount code that you can use if you are interested in attending the Fabric conference, which I realize is kind of far for you guys. So like Warwick, I am a data platform MVP and also a Microsoft certified trainer. I've been using Fabric since before it was officially released, and I've got a couple of classes on LinkedIn, which are really good, especially if your work pays for them. So I've got and I'm working on another Fabric class for them now. Put up my contact information if you want to get a hold of me. I'm on Twitter way too much, and put that information out there. So be sure to follow me if you have a question.
Okay. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Warwick Rudd, like Ginger. I'm a data platform MVP, and most important details about this slide. Contact details, but as Ginger mentioned, you've got 2 options to choose with discount codes if you want to come across to Vegas at the end of March for the conference. Using either of those 2 codes can save you $200 on your registration fee. So what are we going to be talking about? In today's agenda, we're going to cover Apache Spark and Copilot. So with that, let's get into today's session.
So one of the things that is getting to be used more and more inside of Copilot and in data engineering in general, I say that somebody in chat has experience in Databricks and Synapse. And one of the things that both of those use is Spark. And Spark is getting to be kind of the de facto tool for doing ETL. So data engineers or ELT it's getting kind of flipped up. It is an open source framework, and it supports multiple languages. So you could use Spark, but there are other languages which we'll talk about later. And Spark was originally developed in 2009 to help a bunch of graduate students from Berkeley try to win a contest for picking the best algorithm to find out which movies you'd want to see. It didn't come in anywhere near the top in the contest, but we all got a new language and a data type format, and that format was Parquet, that allows you to read data into memory very, very quickly, and then do massive multi-processing to process the same data very, very quickly, and then put the results together at the end. So it's very memory intensive. And it was designed as for machine learning, so it does iterative processes really, really well.
So with Spark, okay, so we've got 4 major components, and the core being at the bottom on Apache Spark, but it's made up of those 4 components being Spark SQL, Spark Streaming, mlib, and GraphX. So what does that all mean for us? Okay, well, that foundational language that we're needing to use, it allows us to perform basic I/O. We can do distributed task dispatching and scheduling, and resilient distributed data sets, or commonly RDD. Okay, now each data set is divided into logical partitions so that they can be computed on different nodes in your Spark cluster. Don't know why that went automatically to the next screen. But Spark SQL, if you haven't already played with Spark, okay, being a data professional, coming from or being used to using T-SQL, when we do get into the couple of later slides and in some of the demos, you will actually see this, and it's very similar to what you're used to, but it's based off of ANSI SQL. Okay, now Spark Streaming, this provides us the processing to occur for streamed data. Rather than just waiting for that to be in batches, we ingest that data and distribute the data by loading it into those RDDs. mlib, that provides that machine learning algorithm that's designed to be used with Spark. There's many standards that you can utilize, okay, but they're built in that you can choose from. Then GraphX, that's the ability to analyze data using a collection of nodes and relationships. Now we've had Graph in the SQL language for a little bit of time, and those easy ways to map things gives us a person, what's our relationship, etc. Why is that not working? There we go.
So I talked earlier that Spark supports multiple languages. Primarily, I use Python, which is the icon with the 2 snakes together. You can also use R, and a lot of people have been working on different solutions for a number of years and want to continue using R so that they can support different libraries that they've already been using. And of course, it also supports Java. That red swirly icon that you may not recognize, that icon is for Scala, and Scala is actually the language that it was used originally, and so a lot of Databricks is done using Scala, but most of the rest of the world uses Python. Now, with any of the languages that you can use all the coding inside is done in a notebook, and you can switch from a code block to a code block which language you want to use. And one of the languages that you can also use is you can switch to SQL. As shown in that previous slide, it's one of the native components of Spark. And I went to the Data and Spark AI conference, and there they were talking about what languages are being used inside of Spark, and they're saying that over 90% of the Spark API calls are used with Spark SQL. So if you're like, I don't know if I want to learn Python or Scala, you can do a majority of your work using the knowledge you may already have with SQL, which means it's a very easy ramp-on process to get good at it.
Keyboard's not working. So writing in Spark, one of the things that we need to remember here is that while many of your existing machine learning code that you may have written was in Python, okay, and you may need to rewrite that to use it in Spark. And the reason for that, excuse me, is that if the code that you've written in Python is not using Spark RDDs, then it won't scale. Now, a friend of ours they had a client that wanted to use Spark to improve their performance. The problem was they expanded their Spark cluster, but they got no extra performance. And that's because the RDDs in being used, specifically being used for Panda for those data sets, does not scale. Now, the way that you get around that is that you get what's the new one? Koalas. Okay. Now, given that most of us are from here in Australia, we know all about koalas, and it is quite funny that the names that some of these texts are given. So if you want to get the most out of your performance with your Spark, is that you need to use koalas, not pandas, so that you are able to scale and get the most out of your environment.
So just to answer the question, PySpark is a flavor of Python, and so we kind of use them interchangeably in this talk. But we're talking PySpark, we are talking Python. Spark in Microsoft Fabric is used a lot in different data engineering and data science experiences. Now, if you will have looked at Fabric as of 2 weeks ago, you'll notice that they changed the way that it looks, and now you just have the Power BI experience, or you have the Fabric experience. But for these tasks, these are what people are used to using in Spark, and you're going to be using notebooks. And one thing, for those of you who are familiar perhaps with Synapse or Databricks, is you'll notice is it's the Spark cluster inside of Fabric is kind of always on. It's a bit of a warm start. It's kind of like putting your laptop to sleep. You can open it up really quickly and it will go ahead and start up, versus if you have it actually off and you have to turn it on in Synapse, that meant a 4-minute wait, generally speaking, when you wanted to start it. The other thing about the session of Spark that is being used inside of Fabric is it is workspace configurable. So you don't have to do anything. If you create a workspace, you automatically have Spark clusters allocated to you. You have a default configuration set. You can choose to change that to something more specific for your environment. If you want to say, use a larger cluster, or perhaps you want to use a smaller cluster. The other thing about the way that Fabric works is that you're not billed necessarily per each instance. You have an overall Fabric tenant usage when it comes to resources. So it's not as apparent how much a given Spark resource is, working against that total. But you can change it up. You can also choose to load specific libraries that you would want to load in a specific environment. Again, that's at the workspace level. Now, one of the things that's really cool about notebooks and using Spark inside of Microsoft Fabric is the full integration that it has with the data, with data. When you create a notebook inside of Fabric, about the first thing you do is you connect a data source to it, such as a lakehouse. And once you have your lakehouse connected, you can just drag and drop over and it'll automatically create a data frame for you. You don't even have to write any code. It's just, clicky, draggy, droppy kind of stuff. You can use your notebooks as part of pipelines to run complex ETL processes. So you could, transform your data, and instead of doing it inside of a stored proc, you would do that inside of a notebook. And if you're looking to incorporate medallion architecture, Spark notebooks really help you do that as well, because they provide a very easy way of monitoring which processes are going on where, based on how modular you design your notebooks. You can choose to do different libraries. So let's say that you want to move to the latest Spark library in one workspace and may have other workspaces where you don't use those because you're doing different tasks. No problem. You can fully support that inside of Fabric. And once your notebooks is created, it's also a 100% compatible Python notebook. So you can download the IPMBY file if you wanted to too, just in case you wanted to look at the code, or you could even run it locally. And we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Now, Ginger, you were just talking about that, it's in a semi-warm state when you're opening that up. Now, for our attendees who may have been playing with Synapse, that's a little bit different, isn't it? In that, now what we've got, when we first load that, we've got a couple of options that we can use, being our in Synapse, what it used to be, when we first created it, it needed to be created with a dedicated pool. Then we needed to load our libraries, and then we were ready to go. But as you just mentioned, this just happens out of the box. It's ready to go, okay? We don't need to go and create it. It's just there. We get to choose what libraries we want. We've got our PySpark or Python, as Ginger mentioned from the question in the chat. We're just going to use that interchangeably throughout the session. The libraries that we've got installed, so it uses the Microsoft Azure Synapse Client library, which uses the Azure SDK for Python. Let's let some people in. That make it easier for us to manage our runtime needs, as well as our data needs that we're going to be accessing and pulling that into our pipelines for processing purposes. With the ability to choose those different versions, this is where the supportability comes into it as to what libraries are supported. And as at the time that we put together this slide deck, it's been packages have been tested with Python libraries up to version 3.8. Excuse me.
Now, I talked earlier about Spark SQL, and basically it is so easy to use. If you have created a notebook and you set the primary language, because you can pick primary and secondary languages. If you set the primary one to PySpark, meaning you're going to be doing Python. If you want to use SQL, you can just enter in the top, as a top line, %% SQL. And from that point, you can write SQL statements using ANSI SQL, just like you would perhaps do the same sort of thing that you might do in Management Studio, because it's native to Spark. So you can easily write SQL commands to query your data, to analyze your data, to do any kind of analysis that you may be used to using in Management Studio to determine how you're going to join your data together. Now, to be honest, most of the time I use a lot of this the magic command when I'm doing my own analysis. I'm trying to figure out how to join a table. What do I need to do to create this fact table? And I write all of that inside of my notebook using %% SQL, run that, see how that's working, make sure that my joins are exactly how I need them to. Now, the only difference is that it uses ANSI SQL. And I didn't realize how much different it was from T-SQL until I started writing a lot of it. But I don't care anymore now, because what I do when I'm writing SQL is I tend to write it in T-SQL. And then I will take that code and go to Copilot and say, rewrite in PySpark SQL. Done. And then it will write it in ANSI SQL for me. It's just a couple of dumb things. Like date part is date_part. And there's no substring, and just a couple of things that are just dopey, and I am way too lazy to do that. So to be honest, I let AI do that part for me, and I've never had a problem with it. And I do know enough about what I'm doing to know whether or not it's going to give me the right results, which is always an important thing to check when you're using AI.
So what does that look like? Well, as we've mentioned, we've got two approaches. So what we've got up on the screen at the moment, we've got our first approach, which is using our PySpark, right? So our PySQL, I should say. And what we can see here is that we're creating it as a data frame. What are we doing? And then we're saying, for that data frame, load up the data. Now, the way I like to think about this, like Ginger mentioned, how do I write this? It's slightly differently. Well, for those of us, because we are data people, we're used to writing it in T-SQL. And so this, to me, comes across as like a dynamic SQL. right? In Management Studio, we want to write a dynamic SQL statement. We've got our variable. We're putting our statement together inside of that, and then we're executing that statement, and we get the results. Well, this is exactly what it's doing here. It's saying load the bikes data frame via Spark SQL. Go and give me all of the products with 3 columns where those products or where the category of those products are either a mountain bike or a road bike. And then our display is our command to actually return that result set that's being loaded into the bikes data frame. The magic command, like Ginger mentioned, not special at all, %% SQL, and then here we go. It looks exactly like what we would write inside of Management Studio for our normal SQL. As Ginger mentioned, there's a couple of commands which we do need to be wary of that we possibly can't use, but for all intensive purposes, this is how easy it is, depending on which version you feel more comfortable in. And we'll see some of these in the upcoming demos.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one thing too, everybody wants to use the tools that they're familiar with, the tools that have had perhaps a lot more years of practice behind them. You can definitely use Fabric with Management Studio or Azure Data Tools if you want to use that. And you can also, instead of using the UI to develop your Python code, you can use VS Code to do that. Now, there are some steps that are involved to do that. It's a little bit detailed, and we wanted to make sure that just in case you can't do this because your work has a policy that they do all this kind of stuff, of providing you all the steps that are required to make sure that you've got VS Code set up appropriately to run on your local machine. Why might you want to do this? Well, frankly, you like the UI better. I kind of like the UI better in VS Code. It's just the way you can flip back and forth. I just like the way that it works better. Again, it's all personal preference, but also, hey, if I can use VS Code to write code, why not? Write everything else there. So there's a couple things that we got to make sure that we do. We need to prep the machine by installing Java, because it does require that. And you need to make sure, and I put the link in there for where you do it. It's got to be something above version 8. Now, Python is using all of the Anaconda libraries, so you want to make sure that you install Conda. I played around with it. Sometimes it asks me for an email and sometimes it doesn't. So just be prepared with an email if you do get asked for that. You do have to install also the Jupyter extension for VS Code. Jupyter, again, the type of notebooks. Technically, the ones inside of Fabric are called Interact. It's just another flavor of Jupyter notebook, but you do need to install that extension inside of VS Code to be able to run the Fabric notebooks inside of that environment. And I put the link in there just in case you'll need it. Generally speaking, you can just do that from inside of VS Code, though.
Now, one of the additional things that you need to make sure that you do is making sure that you've got your environment variables set. Okay, and so the main one that we're wanting to have, so we took the screenshot just so that you've got it, makes it nice and simple, making sure that you've got your Java home variable set and how we go about doing this. Now, everything that we're showing over the next couple of slides, as Ginger mentioned, it is here so that easy reference for you to come back, but we do actually take you through this in our upcoming demo.
Now, one of the things you also have to do is you have to make sure that you have your path modified. And to do that, you need to go to Control Panel, edit the system properties, and make sure that your path is going to include Java Home Bin and Conda Bin. Is it possible to set up with VS Code with VN as opposed to Conda? No, because Conda is a series of libraries that is used by Fabric. So you have to use those libraries. Those are the ones that it uses. You have to use those.
Now, we spoke about using VS Code and the extensions. The beauty of VS Code is that you get to pick and choose what one you've got. Now, when you do come into VS Code, yes, it's still called Synapse for VS Code, but open up the extension. So if you're unfamiliar with VS Code, once you've opened it up, down the left-hand side here, we come down to our extensions and it'll show you in our screenshot, it's already installed. Choose your extension and away you go. Now, the beauty of this and the reason why we've done it this way is, as we mentioned, If you can't do it and your work needs to, you can download this extension, provide it to your security team. They can do all of their checks and balances of this and then place it into a location where you can easily install. And you would just navigate from here to where they've placed that V6 file, do the installation, and you're up and running.
The last step that you need to do is to install a working or select a working directory, because you are actually physically downloading your code to your local environment where you're working on it. Now notice on the VS Code, the bottom icon is the Synapse icon, which is what is installed after you install that extension that Warwick just talked about. Once you sign in, it'll show you all of your workspaces that you have available inside of the Fabric environment. You select a workspace and then you will be downloading that to the location you specify.
So with that, we've got our first demo where Ginger is going to take us through what we've just put in our slide.
Now, as much as I would love to be installing this for you live, I can't install it on my machine more times than one. So I recorded when I did it so that you will have, so I can show you the way that all of this works. So Warwick, if you could start up the video.
I've lost my pointer, but hopefully should let me. Why are you?
So I went Buck Woody and did a recording. There are a lot of steps. I also sped some things up because, you know, who wants to wait and watch things install? But I wanted to make sure that I went through the steps for you to do that.
Oh, why is that not going away?
So one of the things that you'll notice here because we have not installed Synapse yet, that S icon does not appear underneath the two little boxes there, and it will by the time that we're done.
No. Yes. Oh, I don't want to go back. It's not playing ball.
Just resize it a little bit.
My laser pointer won't go away.
Thanks, Hides. I'm not going to say anything. I blew up so much stuff today.
Oh,
It's not even funny.
Hey, while Warwick's trying to get sorted there, there's a question in the chat for you, Ginger. I'll just read it out. Is it possible to set up VS Code with VMV as opposed to Conda?
It isn't, because Microsoft used Anaconda, so you have to use it. You have no choice.
All right, here we go.
All right. So what I'm going to do first is pull off the Synapse VS Code and just install that. So then it's going to show up there on the left-hand side. So that's the first step that I'm going to go ahead and do. Didn't have to go anywhere, didn't have to do anything. I could just do that. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to download Java. So I want to make sure that I get the JRE, not the JDK. So scrolling down and getting the Windows 64 version. So going ahead and downloading that. So I've got the JDK here, and I'm always put it in a folder just in case things blow up on me. Want to make sure that I go ahead and install that so that I have what I need to be able to run it. So just kind of click through the thou shalt have to do this. And it's going to go ahead and install a JDK. And I did speed this up a little bit so that you're not watching the whole thing because that part's boring. Speed that up there. And then it's going to go ahead and be done with that. So then the next thing I'm going to do is make sure that I've got Jupyter installed. So, oh, I have to install Miniconda too. So I'm going to go ahead and select Miniconda, make sure that I get the 64-bit Windows version, and go ahead and save that, which is why I made sure that I selected it rather than click on that green button. So just renaming this to Miniconda. Microsoft uses Anaconda for all of their online versions. So if you were to use this inside of Synapse, it still uses Miniconda. It's the library that they have decided to use. So I'm going to go ahead and install this. I realize this is kind of a number of steps, but hey, you only do this once and then you're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and have it clear the package on completion, which is what it recommends. Speeding through the installations, this takes much, much less time. All right, go ahead and say next, and I'm done. So go ahead and finish that. In a minute, I'll get around to it. Now I want to make sure that I have those things unchecked first. All right. So next up, we're going to be looking at our environmental variables, making sure that the path is set appropriately. So I want to make sure that I add a new environmental variables to the path, adding that Java home bin, making sure that slash is going the right direction there, so that I've got the information that I need for that. And also I need to edit my environmental variable to add conda bin. So once I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and say, okay. Got all that configured. Next up, going to go back to my VS Code environment. And I am going to go to Synapse. And I'm going to set my local work folder to the location that I want to use for my local environment. So I'm just going to pick a place on my hard drive here to set as my local folder. So create a new folder and calling that Fabric. And set that as my local folder. And of course I have to sign in because I haven't done that enough today. So going ahead and signing in. Yep, I'm signed in. I'm going to go ahead and close this window because I'm done with that now. And once I have signed in, here's my Synapse icon here. I can select my workspace. These are all the workspaces that I have inside of my environment. I went ahead and selected the one called Fabric because I'm unique that way. And here are all of my different notebooks. So if I want to write or use any of these, notice if I hover over, I see some information about it. And then download that notebook to and it's going to download that into the local work folder that I have specified. And then I can go ahead and open it up. And once I have opened it up, I can go ahead and then run it. You see all of the code that I have. If I change it here, it'll change it there. So that's pretty much it for what you need to do to be able to run Fabric locally.
Okay. So from a Power BI, using Copilot in Power BI, because everything's all about Copilot, and we're going to be talking about Copilot. Now, Power BI is only one part of what you're looking at, okay? But to access it, right? So you need to have the inside of the Power BI service, the workspace you're running in has to be either running connected to an F64 or, at the time we started to put this together, the premium capacity, which you can't go and get any further. To use Copilot in Power BI Desktop, you need to be either an admin, a member or contributor with access to at least a single workspace that is assigned to your F64 capacity or higher. Okay. Once you've got access to that, your location or where you're working from, you'll probably need to talk to your administrator to have your location or your IP address whitelisted in that section so that you can access it. Now, if you are still on that old premium capacity, you still can use this, but you've got to, you're probably going to get spoken to about moving to a FSKU to allow you to continue using that moving forward.
Now, I know many of you may think, nuts, I don't have a FSKU. I have to say that really well, make sure to pronunciate that well so no one's insulted. But what if you want to have Copilot-like functionality on a lower SKU? What can you do? Well, you could use Data Wrangler. So if any of you have ever used Power Query, you can find many of the same features and functionality that are inside of Power Query inside of Data Wrangler. Now, technically, it's not AI because you can use it in any FSKU. It does write code for you though, and the kind of code that it writes is code that you would find for doing different kinds of data transformation tasks, like maybe changing a column name or a data type. And it's to assist you in modifying your data frames, and it will then help you do that to write the code. And it writes Spark code for you, and we'll put it inside of your notebook.
Now, for those of you on the call, you might be like me, you hardly ever work in it, but you want to be able to get up to speed very, very quickly, help you learn, but also create this in a very simple manner that you're able to then reuse. Okay, so Data Wrangler allows us to do that. While it's not Copilot, it is generating some stuff for us, as Ginger mentioned, and I can write that Python code. I can get it to that code to do a number of things. We'll have a look at it in the upcoming demo. Like Ginger mentioned, here's our data set. What do I need to change to make our life easier so that I can then take that data that we've got from that data set, put it into our pipeline, actually make it usable, and without having to know a lot about Python to start with. You're going to have to learn, because anything AI, you're going to be given those results. You're then going to have to confirm, is that correct? This is going to give us that, as Ginger mentioned, drops it straight into our notebook, and we don't need that F64 SKU to be able to do that. So let's have a look at Data Wrangler and how we can use it. So what we've got, hopefully this looks pretty familiar to you all, or as Ginger mentioned at the start, this recently changed. And when you first log into app.fabric.microsoft.com, you are greeted with a single pane, and we're wanting to, let's have a look at Data Wrangler for our environments. So the first thing that we're going to do is going to come to our workspace, and I've got a couple of items that we can use, but I want to create a new notebook. So we come down, create our notebook. Now, we did mention that the first thing that we do need to do is add our data source. So I've already got a lakehouse, so we're just going to add that. It's without schema, which is possibly what you're used to working with. So we hit add, and we've got our workload that we've already got. Now, this is quite an apt demo that we chose specifically for our demographic, beer consumption per person per capacitor. So we've got our data source loaded, we've got our notebook open, and the first thing that we're going to do in our code, just to make it a little easier, no typing, but here's our easy statement, right? So like we saw on the slides earlier, creating a data frame, using Spark SQL, selecting all of the details. You wouldn't do this in prod, but give me all of the details from our consumption per person. We'll execute that. It'll take a little bit to warm up and pull the top 1,000 rows, then output that display using the display data frame. Once that's finished, we will get our first result set coming back. Hopefully it won't take too much longer for this to complete, but downside to running it live first time, having to get everything up and running for us. Once it is our result set, hopefully there we go, we're starting to Put our log, and there we go. We're starting to generate. Here's our output, and we should get a result set. There we go. So our capacity, we've got 1,000 rows of data, and we can see that because it was unstructured, we might not have known what those columns were that we were working with. As I mentioned, if we're wanting to pull this into our pipelines to make it a whole lot easier moving forward, one of the things that we would want to do is quickly and easily change our column headers. Well, using Data Wrangler, this is really simple to do. We can come up to our Data Wrangler. It'll open that up. We choose our data frame that we're wanting to use. And this gives us our four columns with all of our data in it. We've got a load of operations that we can do that makes our life easier. But what we're going to do to change those column names nice and simple, we come to schema, come down to our rename, choose our column. So we've got our C0 column. This is our country. Okay, let's just give it a capital. And we've done that. We'll go and quickly change all of the others. We choose our second one, which is our country code. We've next got our year that we're wanting to utilize. Just as well, it's only 4 columns. There we go. And our last column that we want to change to give it a proper name is our capacity. Now, the beauty of this, you'll see that with all of these changes, so we can now see here, it's gone and done it live for me, so I can actually see that they're associated correctly with those. If I made a mistake, it's nice and simple. I can come down here and we've got cleaning steps. I can delete one of those if I wanted to, re-go through the whole process. So I've changed that. All I need to do now is go add code to notebook, and it generates our PySpark code. Okay, so we're going to create a new data frame called clean data, and it's going and changing those. We hit add, it brings us back to our notebook. If I scroll down, here's our new code cell, which we're then going to go and play against. By executing that, this will now give us our same result set, but we will actually have column names that are meaningful that we're able to then use in our processing. Now, when that's, there we go, we've finished. As data people, if we're using this, we can see our capacity. It's telling us it's a string data type. The likelihood is you're not going to want to use a string data type. You're going to want this as a numeric data type so you can play with it appropriately. Once again, we can come back into Data Wrangler and we can use the same process as we did before, or for the particular code cell, we can gain access to it. It brings up the same as we saw before with our code. For our capacity, we want to change its data type. Nice and simple. Instead of doing it over on our operations, I can just click on the ellipses up here and I can say change column type. Same type of operation, brings us over what column are we doing. Okay, I want to change this to, let's say, a float 32, and let's apply that. Go and add that to our code. There's our generated code that's being added straight back into our notebook. Come down here. So what's it done? It's taken our clean data frame that we've changed the column headings for. We're now saying, right, let's change the capacity column and we want to cast it to a numeric, and let's output that. Quickly run that. There's our result set, and we can now see we've quickly and easily been able to, with a few keystrokes, right? I haven't had to write any code, and we've been able to add column headings and change data types of the data all inside of our notebook. So with that, let's go back to the presentation.
Yeah, I'm with Heidi. Data Wrangler is super cool, and you can use it to teach yourself how to write Python. So maybe next time you write it yourself rather than use the tool. So one of the things about Copilot and Fabric, like I said, you have to have an F64 SKU. And if you're like me and you have been running the Fabric trial because they haven't made you get rid of it yet, I've got 45 days left again. And I cannot use Copilot on it. To use it, I'm going to have an F64 SKU. Now, the pricing is complicated. Heidi mentioned that there is now something that was introduced in January 22nd, that is a Fabric Copilot capacity. And you can get a per user license for Fabric Copilot capacity as long as you have a Fabric SKU. Yes, that's complicated. With and this means that you're charged when you use it. One thing that you can do with Copilot is it does take quite a bit of your resources. So you do want to watch your resource library to make sure you're not running up against not running against some things. By the way, yes, you can use other Python libraries like NumPy, Encode, etc. NumPy is included as part of Conda though, so that wouldn't be one you would need to add. But yes, you can add additional libraries.
Okay, so AI in notebooks, what does it allow us to do? Okay, so while we had a look at Data Wrangler, not quite AI, but we do have the ability with Copilot, like Ginger mentioned, having the appropriate licensing and SKU. Thank you, Heidi, for providing the a little bit extra information there from a bit over 10 days ago. But what does it allow us to do? We can easily create charts, we can write code, and we can even document existing code. So writing code, well, we've got the ability, which I won't go too much into, but because we're going to cover it in the next couple of slides, as well as in the last demo of today's session, but we can get assistance in, like I did with the Data Wrangler, what type of code do I need to have to add to that notebook to do things? Document existing code. I don't know how many of you have come back and looked at some of the code that you wrote yourselves and come back and look at that a little while later and you slap yourself going, what were you thinking? This makes it nice and simple for you to add that on the fly, making it so that you can easily come back, not just yourself, but if you're working with others, so that they can come back and read your code efficiently down the track.
Now, one of the things about adding Copilot to Fabric Notebook, it used to add some libraries and they seem to change over time. What happens though is you click on a button that says, hey, do you want to add Copilot to this notebook? When you say yes, it's going to create its own cell that it creates. It's starting doing the Copilot right off. And in that cell, it's going to say load ext ds Copilot installer and then activate ds Copilot. It runs these, it inserts these, you run them. And one very important thing to mention is this will restart your notebook. So anything that you've done, it's going to restart the whole thing. It does take a while to load the Copilot library, so you want to make sure that you've added your warehouse first, or your data first rather, because if you add a lakehouse after you have Copilot added, you have to rerun the whole thing again, which is time consuming.
Now, we've spoken about magic commands. The thing to remember, now I'm showing here, this is pretty easy. We don't need to worry about what they actually do because lo and behold, they are called pretty close to what they do, chat, % chat. So that allows you basically a Q&A inside of your notebook to ask questions on what you're wanting to add. Code, generate some code. Describe, this is where we're able to document it. Add comments, fix errors. So if you're like me, when you are typing, you do get the occasional mistyped word. Why is it not working? This can help you out. Also, translate makes it nice and simple, but have a look at, these are all double %. Do you need to know other things? Well, we'll have a look.
Yeah, so one of the things that they had this thing going where they did double %, and then they changed it when they came with Copilot. So you can choose to set output or new task or set your language in addition to things like describe. But here's the thing, you don't have to remember these, because when you run Copilot, what it does is it adds a markdown document to your code that lists all of these different magic commands and what they do. So you've got the codes and the descriptions available, so you can just scroll up and take a look at them. We'll see that in the demo.
Using the Copilot pane, like we mentioned about that type Q&A, we can open this up, away it goes, add in any questions, what we're wanting to do. The beauty of that, we can then take that, drop it straight into our code or our notebook if we want, or what we're going to see in the upcoming demo is how it's able to take an existing notebook and work through that notebook. So with that, we'll go to our last demo for today.
Now let's see, I hope I can I take control?
You should be able to, yes.
I have no, requesting control is disabled. Let's see if I can do it now. Sure.
There we go.
I'm all good now. All right. So I assume that you can share my screen. So I'm going to
Yes.
show you the cooking school version. And basically, we're going to start out with just a pile of ingredients. I'll show you the thing that it's done. We'll kind of go back and forth because we don't want to wait for necessarily for the cooking to go on. Now, I created just a simple notebook here, and I'm going to go ahead and add my lake house to it so that I've got some data. So I'm going to go ahead and, I can click on either one. So I want it without schema. The reason why I want it without schema is for a while, it didn't work really well. And so all of my lake houses were created without schema. So if you've created it without schema, it's still without schema. So I'm going to go ahead and add my LKAW lake house here. So I'm going to go ahead and add this. And I would have dragged these over, but hey, I was being lazy and did this a little bit further. Notice when you drag them over, every single one of your data frames is called DF, and I wanted to give them actual names. So I changed the names out so that sales matches sales, et cetera, et cetera. So with this, so I've got product category and all of that good stuff. So what I'm going to do is I am going to now use Copilot. Now, if your Copilot up here is not this beautiful rainbow color and is instead black and white, sorry, you cannot use Copilot. You do not have the right capacity available to you. So when I click on it, I get this pane. I'm going to go ahead and say get started. Now notice when I do that, I get this markdown header, and then I get this cell that says run this cell to install the required packages for Copilot. Now I'm going to go ahead and say run all. I've not run this yet because I'd have to rerun it when I added Copilot. So I'm going to go ahead and say run all. And it's going to start it, and then it's going to do all of the Copiloting stuff. So we'll give it some time to kick off, and then we'll go over to another notebook that I have where I've got it actually running. Because like I said, this takes, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes to run. So we'll kind of go back and forth and see this work. But notice, it added all this. Now it's going to run its code here. And while it's busy doing this, we're going to flip over to the done version, so the completed cake, as it were. And I've got the same code. So when it is done with all of the code that it is doing, you'll notice that you get a whole bunch of stuff here. I don't know why it gave me an error, but it's their code, so you can't change it. And then you'll notice you get this markdown document. So it tells you that it is using the installed DS Copilot package. It's using Fabric. It's using GPT 3.5 Turbo. Now, if you know anything about the different libraries in that for Chat GPT, obviously Microsoft spent do Dr. Evil, $10 billion to get a license for Copilot from OpenAI. And the latest model is not 3.5. 3.5 though is smaller and faster, hence the turbo name. There are some things that it does not have, just FYI. Some of the things that it does not have does not have data that is very new. So I know you guys don't care about this, but here in America, we did this thing called the Super Bowl, and they would not know that the Eagles lost if you were using GPT 3.5 because it doesn't default to the interwebs when it doesn't know the answer, unlike GPT 4.0. And yeah, I do mean the letter because they're that cute. So just keep in mind there are some differences with the different models. It's important to know which one you happen to be using. Now it's going to write eventually all of the same thing over here in Notebook 3 that's here in Notebook 1. So it shows me that it's, Chat Magic is powered by OpenAI and by Microsoft. And here is how it tells you how to use it. So all the things that were on that slide, yeah, it's right here. So it shows you chat, code, describe, add comments, etc. And if you want to use a question mark, it's going to give you a detailed operation. Now, it should also have the pane. I don't know why it doesn't. It does on the other one. We'll go back to looking at the pane. So I'll flip back and forth. So now it knows about my data frames because I have run that. So again, these are the same 3 data frames that I created earlier. So what I can do is I can start asking it questions. Now let me go over, flip over to this notebook and see if it is finally done with its Copilot. Yes, it is, so that I can go ahead and then ask it to do stuff and have it do some things for me. So what I can do is I could have it write some code for me. So maybe I'm going to ask it about my data frames. I got some data here. What about it? So what I'm going to do is I am going to create a code cell by clicking on code, and I'm going to ask it to describe my data frame. So to do that, I'm going to use the magic command, and I'm going to say describe. And describe what? DF sales. So what is that? What do I got here? So I'm going to go ahead and run this cell. It's got Copilot available to me, so it's going to tell me all about it. So it says, hey, in the DS sales data frame, there is data related to sales orders. Well, that's mildly interesting. Now I've got some documentation, and I could include this if I wanted to use this for documentation. I've got this markdown that I can save that could be part of my part of my code to make it easier for other people to run. So inside of my sales, let me take a look at this real quick. I want to make sure that I have done this correctly. You know what I want to do? I'm going to go ahead and I am going to add another data frame. Wait a minute. Why am I going to do something smarter? So what I've got is I've got inside of my sales, I've got my customer table inside of here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it write some code for me. I'm going to play ignorant, and I'm going to say, hey, what I want you to do is I'm going to say 5% code, and I'm going to tell it what I want. What do I want? Well, what I wanted to do is I want to create a new data frame joining DF sales and DF, what did I call it? Customer. Now what? I make sure that I have, that was stupid. I have to remember that everything is case sensitive, but I was inconsistent in my naming. Bad me. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and I told it what I want. I want a new data frame. So what it's going to do is that it's going to create one for me. And maybe I wouldn't have written it this way. I wouldn't have written it this way. But now I've got a new data frame. You're like, well, that's great. But what do I need to do to display that? Of course, use this display command. So I didn't tell it to display it. I told it to write it. So what I can do is I can just add a new code cell. So we can take a look at DF joined. And I'm going to say display DF joined. So we can see I've got a new data frame that it created for me. Oh, because I didn't run this. Hello, to run this cell. And it says DF customer is not defined. Now, I was really good when I did this, and I made sure that this was lowercase and this is uppercase. And if we look at how I created it, yeah, I did create it uppercase. But when it created code for me, it said nobody would do that because that would be really stupid. So it capitalized customer, even though I didn't. This just gets into the fact that it is not perfect. So I can't say if I'm inconsistent, it may do it wrong. And even though I did it right here, it's like, no, it's going to go ahead and run this cell. It liked it. Now I'm going to display it. And now it will display it. So even though that, I didn't do it that way, yes, it did. Yes, Copilot heavily consumes fabric compute capacity. And if you want to save your resources, yes, you should be looking sparingly. I know there's a lot of other sessions we can show you how to monitor that. I'll just say TLDR, look at the fabric capacity app, especially since last month Microsoft updated it so that it has even more data in it. So check that out if you haven't already. So I've got Copilot that created some code for me. So that's kind of cool. It went ahead and did that. So I'm going to use the pane just to vary it up for having it do some things for me. So what I'm going to go ahead and have it do is I want it to go ahead and say, create a chart to show the sales orders for the sales amounts by month and year. Maybe I'm just not very good at writing charts. So I'm going to have it do it for me. And I'm going to go ahead and say send. And one thing that I didn't tell it to do, which is bad prompt engineering on my part, as I didn't tell it to write code, but it did it anyway. You never can tell. Now, this icon here is the insert code icon. Yes, it always puts it in as at the bottom. So this is the code that it generated for me. It screwed up my previous code. Let's see how good it is at doing this. So yeah, it didn't do it correctly. Now, why is that? Well, because I don't have a, if we look at my table here, I don't have anything called year month. I told it that I wanted to do year month, but I don't have a field called that. And it just dumbly assumed that that's what I wanted because that's what I said. So it's very literal. And even though it should, you'd think, well, it knows because you've got your data frame right here. It knows all the content of that. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to do it correctly. So let's see, honestly, what I did. So what I want to do is I would need to change my prompt to say that I want to do it by my order date. So I'm going to say, create a chart for sales amounts using the order date field, order date column, and show the data by order date, year, and month. See if it likes that a little bit better. By the way typing inside of a prompt has a really fancy name. That is called prompt engineering. And it's kind of a very fancy name. You can get jobs that I've seen inside of LinkedIn for it. Now, I will say that it didn't do any better. Because again, if we look at my code, it is, well, I created that based on order date, data period, month. So let's run this. What the heck? Yeah. Because I don't have, it's saying order date, date to period, but it's grouping by year, month. And I don't have anything called that. I've got date to period, but it's telling me that the column object is not callable. So maybe, and this is the maybe, what I can do is I'm like, well, this isn't right. If we go back and look at our main commands here, I've got one to fix errors. And let's see if I can get it to fix the errors because it's not doing it correctly. So to do that, I'm just going to paste in that fix errors, and then I'm going to go ahead and run this cell and see if it can get any smarter for me. And I do need it to be the first thing up here. So tell it to fix errors. Notice that comment screwed it up, so it's doing it, and it's seeing if it can do it. And it says I can't fix anything. It's beyond the scope, but it did take that fix errors out of there, which is kind of a nice thing. But it's basically saying nope, no can do. Now, if we look at my notebook, I do think I did get it to successfully do a chart. See if I did. Now, so I think I did it here. Let's see if I can get this to run. Nope. So wasn't able either time to make it. Oh, I got one to do it here though. I got it to do sales amount over time based on the order date. So notice it did what I did get it to create a chart. I used a slightly different prompt engineering, and I got a chart out of it. So depending upon exactly how you ask the question, maybe how you can get the answer. All right. Any questions about that, other than that Copilot question, which I already answered? Martin, you have another question?
Are there any more questions in the chat? Hang on a minute. Here's one here. Can you use other Python libraries in NumPy in code, etc.?
I did answer that, but NumPy is part of Anaconda. So you wouldn't use NumPy, but you can add any additional libraries that you wanted.
Right. Okay. And Gemel is just wondering, you know, how much does Copilot consume Fabric capacity? Just trying to gauge if it should be used sparingly or not, basically.
Yeah, and the answer is yeah, it uses a lot. It uses a lot of capacity. I was doing a training class for a client, and we had 30 people all doing Copilot in class, and that with the regular workload, we max it out to capacity. So yes, it does. The idea though is if you can have it help you write code, then you may not use it all the time. Get it to do what you need to do. Get it to document your code, write your charts, and then you don't need to continually run it.
Okay.
Is Copilot only supported in the notebook experience? No, Copilot is supported using also pipelines and of course within Power BI. So it's not just inside of notebooks. Can you use any other AI software outside of Azure to generate Python Fabric scripts? So that is a very good point. So what Python is, the Python that is being used inside of Fabric is actually open source Python. It is not Microsoft special Python. The only thing that is special is how you connect to the data. So how you connect to the data is unique to Fabric, but if you wanted to write this whole thing locally, you would just have to change out your data connection part of it, and it would all work the same. So, and yes, you can use GitHub Copilot, and you can use GitHub Copilot also with VS Code running locally. So Copilot on Copilot.
Cheers for that, Ginger.
So just on that, great call out from Heidi. We haven't mentioned it so far today, but you know, if you come back to the Data Platform Downunder YouTube channel, I'm pretty sure we've got a session on there which is all about using GitHub Copilot. It was in Azure Data Studio, which has been decommissioned, but it's exactly the same as what you can do inside of VS Code to assist you. And so it's just another learning operation, okay? So you can use it to go, how do I learn this new code? What are the things that I need to be doing? Like what we've been showing here in Copilot inside of the notebook. It'll give you some answers, but don't always take those answers as gospel. So that actually brings us to the end of our session. So timing wise is fantastic. What did we actually cover off over the last little over 60 minutes? Well, we gave you an introduction to Apache Spark. We introduced what Spark is inside of Microsoft Fabric. We looked at some very lightly, licensing requirements, because we could go down an entire rabbit hole just talking about licensing requirements. We started off looking at the Copilot simulation using data wrangling. Even though it isn't using Copilot, it allows us to easily generate code, learn what we're wanting to do, manipulate it, create that code, save it in our notebooks that we're easily able to come back and utilize down the track. We took you through able to set up things inside of VS Code, right? That was a big part of what we were doing. So you can take this away, set up your environment, run this locally, come back, watch the first demo, as well as then having a look at what are the different magic commands, our %% or our single % inside of our workbook, having your different Q&A options, etc. Unfortunately, like Ginger showed in her trial capacity, hers is the multicolored. If I bring mine back up that I did my demo in, you will see, there we go, disconnected, but you'll see my Copilot, because I've only got the trial, it's not available for me. So I can't do that. And that's what it would look like for you if you don't have the appropriate capacity to be able to use that in your environment. To round out, we'll just come back here. But once again, we do have time for questions. Leave up the contact details. As we mentioned at the start, our most important things on these slides are our contact details. Feel free to reach out to either Ginger or myself, asking us any questions on this. Happy to answer. As we mentioned, we're both going to FabCon in Vegas, and we will be doing a completely different session than this one. So don't think that you're going to get a repeat. No, it's brand spanking new content that we're going to be putting together. So with that, take note of the that should be grant 200, not grant 100.
I know. I got a bump up after I put the slide.
Oh, there you go. And I didn't update mine on this one, but from the first RUD 200, use either grant 200 or RUD 200, and you can save yourself $200 off of your ticket. Be quick, because prices actually go up tomorrow. So with that, do we have any more questions, Martin?
No, I think we've run out. Ginger's just posted a link about local installations. And I just got one just generally on Copilot. It's not really specific. There's just a raft of Copilots out there. I'm presuming that, the Power Query one is better Power Query than the Lakehouse one, which is better than whatever. Got any comments on that?
So I do have a couple comments on it. For one thing is that they're all using the same library. They just have different places that you can access it. I will say that I am completely unimpressed with DAX. And as I periodically need help with DAX, this makes me very sad. I would say that having DAX code correct is like a coin toss. The code is correct. It is working code. Is it what you asked for? No. It is the worst.
Yeah.
M is a little better. But,
well, if it makes you feel any better, Ginger, you're definitely not the only person who needs Copilot to write the DAX.
I know, and it doesn't do it.
Yes.
And of course, primarily you would do that inside of Power BI, and you can do it in Power BI inside of the automated, the button inside of it to do Copilot inside of Power BI desktop if you're connected, but it's terrible.
So there you go. Even Copilot struggles with DAX like the rest of us.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Okay.
I have everything else I've seen it does a great job. And generally speaking, I do have, Python, I write through a lot of Python code. I just think that it just didn't have enough of a library to learn it well, because it didn't.
So Heidi's got a really, 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 really good question here, right? So Copilot, it needs data to work. how can organizations see what data is sent outside of their region? So,
that depends.
So Heidi,
here's the...
I just want to clarify, and you feel free, you can come off of mute to clarify before we give any answers here. Is your question about assisting you in finding in your tenant when that data is being moved around between your different resources? Is that going outside of your region to another region in that networking transfer side of things? Or are you talking about Copilot looking at and assisting you like we did here? Is that sending data, your data, out into the public realm in a different region?
Yeah, it's probably more towards the latter. Someone did ask me once, because they said they've got that checkbox that the tenant Copilot can, using the OpenAI feature, might be outside your region. And I was like, well, it depends if you consider metadata data, like your semantic model structure would have to go, but not the actual value for the prompt to come back.
Well, here's the thing. It depends on how you're using it, because, okay, if you're inside a Fabric, the information is going to be stored within your tenant. However, let's say that you have decided to use Copilot in your Edge browser, and you are not logged in with your Office ID, so it's just using the free one. That data is used to create the next model. So in that case, the data that you send could be exposed as part of the next model generation. So watch that. The whole thing is out if you do that.
Yeah. It was an interesting one, because the docs have stuff, but it's kind of like piecemeal all over the place. So I was like, I thought I would ask.
Now here's the other thing too. So one thing that Microsoft does do, though, if you are logged in inside of your tenant, your data stays inside of your tenant. Now, let's say that you have a Google Drive, you have a Gmail account, you have Facebook. Any and everything that you put in there becomes part of their data models, which are Google's is Gemini, Facebook's is Meta, Meta's is Llama. So anything that you have ever put inside of a Gmail, sent via Gmail, is part of Gemini. So all of your data is there and is used to feed the model. Now, it'd be very difficult for somebody to get it out, but that's the case for everything that you've got. So keep that in mind next time you use your Gmail account. You are making Gemini smarter because it's analyzing your email. Something to think about.
Any other questions from anybody else in the audience?
Nothing else in the chat, Warwick, and I think we're about time.
All right. Well, thank you, Ginger. Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Like I did mention with answering one of the questions, if you haven't already signed up to the Data Platform Downunder YouTube channel, feel free to register for that or subscribe to that, and you can come back and watch not just this session, but any other sessions that we have hosted and put up there. You'll be able to come back, rewatch this session, pick up any of the bits and pieces that you need to, especially from, configuring this so that you can run this locally. Got all of the details in there for you. So I think
okay, quite a lot of thanks coming through in the chat there. So thanks a lot, Warwick, and thanks a lot, Ginger.
Thank you.
All right.
See y'all later. Bye-bye.